Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike O'Megan. I'm with Orchard View. We farm about 3,500 acres of cherries around the Dalles, Oregon, mostly. Oh, okay. And I'm done. So today I'm going to talk about something so I see a different picture here than on the screen, but you guys will figure it out. Today I'm going to talk about a touchy subject. Every subject in farming, it seems, is touchy. I don't know how many people are in here, but quite a few now that it's gotten a little later in the day. Everyone's got an opinion, and I kind of feel this is like giving somebody an evaluation on their kid. We really love our training systems. We love our varieties. And boy, if you want to really get people riled up, evaluate their kid or evaluate their orchard. So luckily, I'm not a teacher, but I do farm, so I'm going to have to give an evaluation. But I'm only going to evaluate myself. This is my perspective on all kinds of different things that we've tried over time to do to make money down growing cherries in our area. And I think we can all agree that this is what we really kind of don't want to have anymore. Although driving around, you still see some old goldies like this. This is a Royal Land cherry tree down the Willamette Valley, and it picked 1 ton of cherries off that tree, over 100 years ago. You aren't going to make money doing that, but boy, it's sure interesting to think about where have we been. Now we grow trees that are such a fraction of that size, but we can't make money at that. And then I think it's so important, this is why I'm excited about cherries, 2 things. One is people love to eat them, and we're still excited, and BJ claims all the credit for making that happen, about people being excited on cherries and his team. But we also have a fresh start every season. And so I'm excited because last year was also a challenging year. Maybe didn't make up for the previous challenging years that we have in cherries, but we have this opportunity. Well, I guess I'm like everybody else, and the clicker's not working super great for me either. But we have an opportunity to grow a new crop, and right now, all of us that have cherries, we have crews out there, and they're pruning our ground, and it's one of the fundamental actions that we do. I mean, everyone loves silver bullets, and there's a whole sun dome full of silver bullets, robotic this, and new blades of that, and different equipment this, and different equipment that. But pruning is one of those things that if you don't have that right, it doesn't matter how great your drone is that flies over your place. It doesn't matter how good you can track your labor. None of that really matters. You really have to have pruning executed at a high level if you're going to be successful in cherries. And it's just gotten harder. It used to be fun to prune. You could go out there and bring donuts and kind of party, But now, boy, you have to be right on it managing your labor because it's really expensive. And the impact of not doing a good job and being efficient is so high, as we talked about. Okay, I'm going to ask, and I just say next, and we do it that way? All right. Maybe I'll just give a signal. And we do 2 things when we're pruning. One is we put how many cherries are going to be on the tree, and the other thing is we have a big influence of how many leaves are going to be on the tree. And we're talking about training systems. To me, I have to think simple because I'm not that smart. I have to divide things into categories, and that's what I think about it. How many cherries are we going to have on that tree, and how many leaf potential? And there are training systems where, man, there's lots of leaves on there, but not a lot of fruit. Same with varieties. And then there's other training systems where, boy, you can hang a lot of cherries on there, but you struggle in the leaf department. We're going to talk about that. Okay, here comes the tough part, and these guys know more than me, so I'm gonna be quick here. But I just wanted to kind of score all the training systems that we've been playing with over time here in the Dalles. And so Central Leader, it's a nice system. It has about an average yield when we're looking at all the systems that we have under our management. I'd say it has high fruit quality though. Pretty easy to grow a nice looking piece of fruit on Central Leader. The wood's young, good light interception, makes it simple, especially if we have cooperative variety and rootstock. However, weather resistance, and this is something that's become a real big deal for us in the last 5 years, man, it has to be able to take not just cold that reduces our crop, but it has to be able to take heat and wind. Norm was talking about sun scald, and that's something that's new, and I don't know if that's just gonna be a temporary thing or if it's gonna be the new norm, but I think it's gonna be the new norm. How does any of these training systems handle the heat? And one thing that's a bummer about Central Leader is you have flat wood and the fruit's all exposed. It's not sheltered by the canopy. That's one of the reasons we love it for pruning. Then harvest efficiency is really easy on it. Because all the fruit's right there, people can pick it really efficiently. And when we're talking about harvest cost, a big deal for us is how many fruit in a day can each of our pickers pick, and all the costs that's associated with having that person there and supporting them and getting the fruit off. And I'd say it's horticulture, that's a general term. I don't have a PhD in it like Matt, but I will say that horticulture is just how hard it is to grow and how hard it is to teach the people that are doing all the growing to do it. It's pretty easy with Central Leader. It's a really easy system. I'll just say a newbie can kind of get the hang of it pretty quickly, and you can do it with not a super skilled crew. That's my opinion. And I think it takes about the average amount of capital to plant it. All right, next slide, please. So KGB and Bush is something that was a real popular thing. Hopefully Kim Green's not in here. He'll probably want to wrestle me after. But we have had mixed results with any of the Bush type systems. It starts out great. It really hammers and hits the ground running early. But you know, when things are young, they're oftentimes high performative. But when they get older, they also have to keep paying the bills. We don't want to replant it after 15 years. We aren't growing peaches here after all. And so the packable yield ends up in the average, in the long term being about average, I would say. Maybe even a little below average. Fruit quality is also average, and I think that's because there's somewhat of a struggle with managing the age of the wood in these systems. And we kind of get this sunk cost belief in Bush systems, at least that's what we've suffered from, where we're like, oh man, I want to leave that leader there because there's good fruit, but it's old. And then you end up kind of paying in the end. But that's super easy to do in this system. Easy for me to think about, easy for our pruning crews to get caught with that. I'd say it's about average weather resistance. You got a canopy around there, it does better than Central Leader, but it's about average. They are really easy to pick though, and we don't use pedestrian systems. We think that a ladder still needs to be involved in our production. We just can't lose that much yield per acre to losing that elevation. But the pickers can go through really quickly and pick that system really quickly. It's about average horticulture and about average. So that's our experience with it. Next slide, please. Oh, can we go back one? Steep Leader, you know, it's interesting because a lot of the foundational work was done, say, 20 years ago in these different training systems, and we've just gotten better at how we do things. And I don't know, 10 years ago, me would have thought, if you get up and say Steep Leader is really good, everyone's gonna laugh at you, and I'll laugh at myself. But in the end, when we look at the brass tacks and the dollars and cents, we can really get a good yield out of Steep Leader, especially with some of the more productive varieties that are out there. We believe that we can have high fruit quality because we have a good team that is able to keep the wood young and keep the wood productive. And we don't fall victim to that sunk cost thing. We also believe that it has higher resistance to heat and to wind. You know, we could talk about rain and all those things, but heat and wind are really what do us in. We think it's more resistant to that. It's about our average harvest efficiency. Again, you have to have a well-trained crew that can pick off a ladder. The horticulture's probably on the harder end. There's probably more art to this than some of the other systems, but if you have a team that can teach and a team that can learn from those folks, you can execute at a high level year in and year out. And retaining those people is super critical. So I'd say it's harder. It's also harder if something starts to go wrong. You need to correct with nutrients or something in season. It's hard to do that, but you can do it. And I think it's about average capital. So trellis biax, I would suggest for me not doing this. We haven't had success with, I don't know, 50 or 60 acres that we have of that. Its yield doesn't really noteworthy. I'd say it's about average yield, but you still have all that sunk cost. Mixed fruit, it's hard to balance our trees, and maybe we just aren't good at it. But mixed trees, weather resistance, it also is impacted by heat and wind pretty pronouncedly. We have about average harvest efficiency. Horticulture, I believe, is hard, on the harder side, and it's capital intensive. Next slide, please. Trellis TSA, or whatever we want to call it, Trellis Central Leader, some of these things kind of get different. High packable yield, about average on the fruit quality. Average weather resistance, you have a bit more canopy there. It's really efficient to pick those cherries. We find that our crews can pick them really well. I don't know if they're just used to that or what, but again, the horticulture is harder. I don't believe it's easier. I think on a spreadsheet and on paper, drawing things out, it is easier. But when you actually need to live that in production systems where you can't control a lot of the variables, I think it becomes very difficult, and we have to be intensive. And it's high capital cost. Next slide, if I could. So what system is a good system? I'm not going to tell you, because I think they all have pluses and minuses, and you need to look at something. But I will say something I think is really important is we need to work and execute at a high level of what we currently have in the ground. This is, if we're looking about how do we farm into the future and what should we plant and how should we grow it, we need to balance that out with, have we absolutely maximized the acres that we have now? We probably aren't going to plant ourselves out of challenging times if we aren't absolutely maximizing what's producing right now. And so this Bing orchard there, where my pickup's parked, that was planted in 1986. And we still pick 11 tons an acre of fairly large fruit out of that orchard. We need to make sure that that orchard is continuing to perform and do that if we're going to be able to have things planted. And then I like to think about that orchard with leaves on it. You can look at that one of two ways. You can say, oh, that is a total lost opportunity. If that, say, was a trellis or was a UFO or was a KGB and those trees were closer together, it'd be that much better. But this is what we have in the ground right now, and this is what we need to have performing so we can get there. I think that a system that is imperfect on paper but executed in the field at a high level is way better than a system that looks really good on your 5-year plan in the office but isn't executed well in the field. And so I think we need to balance those things out, and we need to always question ourselves if we have any of these systems that require us to have an absolutely good year in cherries every year, or maybe even 4 out of 5 years. We may not get there if we have that much sunk cost in the establishment and the growing and training of those systems. So hopefully these guys will answer what is the best system, because I just left you with a bunch of questions, but that's because I don't know the answer yet. But I think one thing I would say is we need to pick a system that works for us in most of our situations, that most of our crew can do well, and you need to stick with it, and you need to become an expert in it. Don't just keep on trying to find the grass greener on the other side, because that time is time wasted from farming at a higher level of what you got. Thank you. The question was, what's the ideal number of leaders on a steep leader tree? 2 to 4. Yeah, 2 to 4. I don't think there is an ideal. I think it's going to depend on the variety. Certain varieties are conducive to having more leaders than others. I think you need to, there's a lot of nuance in that, and in 5 minutes we aren't going to be able to figure it out. But 2 to 4 leaders.
Thank you. Mike did a great job of, overlaying where we are in this industry, and especially that last picture. I mean, that's what we are. I mean, every one of us can't go out and plant a brand new orchard. And when we do, then we've got challenges. So this is what I have right now. These are 7-year-old trees. What do we have to do? We have to capture sunlight. We have to have a good fruit to leaf ratio. And when you're doing that, make sure when you're looking at your leaf, you're looking at leaf size. Too often you get back into the centers of these trees and you have fruit hanging there and the leaf in there is only half the size of those on the outer part of the tree. You need large, large leaves to capture the sunlight to produce that big cherry. You know, the bottom line is we need to get rid of some of the fruit wood that's in there. We need to get rid of some of the old suckers that are in there, old being last year's. And so, next slide, please. So this is what we try to do. We try to come back in, we eliminate a lot of stuff. If you look close, what we've done is we've kept that top back in. We're trying to get panels for that sunlight to be able to move through and keep the inside open. We're not going to grow a lot of fruit in there. We might grow a little bit, but we don't want to grow a lot of fruit in there because we want sunlight penetrating as the sun moves. So basically, our outer perimeter of that tree is where we're going to grow the tree, and we're going to have small wood. If we start trying to grow any type of cherry on the bigger wood, you're going to end up with a lot of 11 and a half, 12-row cherries. We can't be profitable in this industry with 11 and a half and 12-row cherries. If you're out there paying 35 and 40 cents a pound, and that 11 and a half row cherry is being put in the box and they're selling for 20, 22 bucks, you're losing money. I love these warehouses. There's a place for them. They've got to pack the fruit. We take it. They can't make that cherry any bigger. They're going to pack it. They're going to put it out there. And they're going to make some money, and the marketer's going to make some money, and the picker's going to make some money, and the chemical distributor's going to make some money. And I'm sorry, but you're down at the bottom, and whatever's left is what you're going to get, and you may be getting the bill. So when you start looking at what to do with this fruit that's hanging on the tree, you better be raising 10-row cherries, knowing that you're going to be going both ways to 9, 9 and a half, 10, 10 and a half. Get rid of some of that fruit wood. Next slide, please. So what are we doing today? Mike gave you a pretty good analysis of all the different varieties or different types of pruning techniques we've got out there. We went from the earlier slides where they're 8 by 16, we tightened it up. We've got a closer planting, precocious rootstocks, crimps and giselas. And when we had the machine come in and plant these trees, we said, put that plow down a little bit further. I want that sign down 4 to 6 inches under the surface. I'm not worried about root suckering. I'm not worried about tree suckering. What I want is depth. I want to be able to get down deep so that I have good anchoring, because that precocious rootstock, along with a precocious variety, you're going to run into some problems. You may have to decide that you're going to spend twice as much money to put some wires and some posts back in the ground than you did to actually plant that new orchard and put an irrigation system in it. You got to sit down, work your numbers and say, how much money do I want to spend? If you're in a situation where you've got the background, you've got the money in the bank, and you want to go out there and you want to put a lot of steel in the ground and you want to put a lot of wire in the air and you want to come in and lay everything out there and have it look real pretty, you can get a lot of production early. For me, the return on investment won't pay it for me. I like to do things on a capital basis. Bankers are great people, but I don't want to go to them and have to borrow money to make my new planting. I want to work out of my own pocket. I want to be able to come in with a young tree like that. That's a 2-year-old going into its 3rd year. We cut them pretty hard that first year a couple times while they were growing because we're trying to expand that root system. Trying to make that root get larger so that when that tree gets a little bit bigger, it can carry that crop. I don't need 15 tons to the acre of 11-row cherries. What I need is consistently 9, 10, 10 and a half tons to the acre of 10-row and larger cherries. I can break even, I can stay in business, I can make a profit with those kind of numbers. If I'm out there and I'm putting 11 and a half row cherries in a box, everybody else is making money. God bless them. They're out there working and they're making money. They don't have their hands out asking the government for money. But my pockets aren't that deep that I can keep paying the wages for all those people at the warehouse and all the pickers and everybody else that's out there. I need to put some in my pocket too. So when I sit down, I scratch it all out. I say, okay, my cost is going to be trees, planting, irrigation system. Those are the major things I got to look at. Once I get those trees in the ground, I start trying to develop them. I start from the roots first and come right up so that I have a good strong tree that can turn around, and next year we'll pick some cherries off those. I don't have to pick it in the second year. I can wait until the fourth year if I have to, but I gotta have a strong tree with good light penetration and good spur development. That's what I have to look at. I have to break even and I have to make some money. I've got the money in the pocket to get out until that third and fourth year. So for new development, no, I'm just not doing a lot of wires, not doing a lot of real tight planting. This is on a 6x16 up in the higher elevations, and it'll work real well for us. So, Matt, any questions?
Any questions for Norm? We'll get slides up for Keith. Or Keith, slides up, please. Thoughts or comments, reactions to what Norm's talking about?
Go ahead and throw some rocks at me. I don't care. We're using micro sprinklers. Pardon? Well, whatever the irrigation people came in and engineered for me, that's what I put in. As long as I get good coverage, that's the main thing. I don't want to have an irrigation system that has so much pressure that I'm getting a lot of evaporation going up into the tree and I'm having problems with mildew. I want to have that irrigation down low and covering my root surface. That's all I want to do.
Okay. That doesn't work. Good morning. I'm Keith Oliver. I work for Olson Brothers down in the Prosser, Benton City area. And on that irrigation question, we've got some cherry trees in some pretty rough ground, and dual drip can grow an amazing tree with not very good ground. I think between Mike and Norm and I, we've got over 120 years of experience growing cherries. It might be quite a bit more than that. Mike's a pretty young guy still, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, not that young.
There is no answer to this question. It's been alluded to, they all work, but if you don't have a productive system that grows cherries every year, none of them work. And I think some of us in here have planted those old lousy blocks that just don't set fruit, and it's tough to fix that. Trying to go in and add more pollinizers and spray pollen and doing all the magic you can do, it's hard to fix an old bad block. When I started, we had trees not like the first one that Mike showed on that picture, but they were wide spaced and every tree was a piece of art. They were all different. And then you throw pruner variability in and it added to that variability. And we could get away with some slop in those years. When I started, we packed 13-row cherries some years. And you sure can't get away with that anymore. So we started realizing we needed to get the big wood out of the tops of the trees. And then we got down to steep leader trees. And Norm showed some great pictures, and Mike did too, of nice steep leader trees. Those systems can really work. You've got a lot more uniformity in the orchard. It's just, and, you know, Mike mentioned the horticulture is hard on it, but it's easier, I think. It's more systematic than the old freeform trees. And then we went to some central leader trees after that. You know, we're always looking for the next best thing. And then we planted some UFO. And the first UFO orchard we planted was a 1 acre on the end of a 20-acre Tieton on Gisela 5 block. The Tietons were on central leader, and that was in 2008, 2007, I think. And it didn't take very long to figure out that the UFO fruit was much better quality, and a lot of it related to the things that have been alluded to, with the central leader branches, with the branches out flat. Tietons are really bad for fruit doubling, and the central leader trees double terribly. And the UFO trees didn't double, and they also had bigger fruit size, and they also had more tonnage per acre. And that started to get kind of exciting. And maybe we weren't, I'm sure we weren't doing the central leader as well as we could have, but the UFO was better. So we planted another block of UFO in 2011 that we had new rootstocks coming out, we had new varieties coming out. I thought, well, if we can grow, we're getting 10 tons of Tietons on a 10-foot vertical UFO. I thought, well, if we do it like apples and do a V on a 12-foot row, we can about double our productive fruiting surface for 20% more row space. So that's what we did, and some of the things we did worked and some of them didn't, going back to what I said at first. If you put a system in that just doesn't set fruit, it doesn't matter how cute it is and how much money you spend, it isn't gonna work. But when it does work, it works really well. We're at about 807 trees per acre, and with the leaders every 10 to 12 inches apart, we've got about 8,000 liters per acre, and those aren't all productive because we've got renewals and we've got skips. But some of the things that we've talked about up here, we've got really good protection from the heat because all of the branches are upright. We don't have any old wood in the tree. The only permanent wood is the trunk because leaders just come out right at the trunk. And that's the trickiest part of the horticulture with this, is deciding when to renew the limbs or the uprights. And that first system on Tietons, we let the limbs go too long because we'd look at it and say, well, there's fruit on it, let's not cut it out. Well, pretty soon everything's old. And we got into trouble that way. And so we did some work with Matt, and we cut off all the leaders on some trees. We cut off every other one on other trees, the north side on some, the south side of some. We did a bunch of stuff. And the harder you prune them, the more they come back. Amazing. If you cut them all off, you get a bunch of 8-foot bullwhips that aren't any good. But the key to making this work is how fast you do that renewal. We can go to the next slide. These are just some different pictures. This is a 4th-leaf orchard. Next slide. Oh, that's not us. I mean, it is us. Did you go through all the slides? I don't see them on the screen here. Okay. Pickers love it. They just go right down the row on that 2-dimensional system. They're very efficient in the UFO. We've got some crummier systems we picked before these where the pickers don't do very well, but they stick around because they know the candy's coming. They get into these blocks and they do very well. So there are probably 8 or 20 other points I wanted to make, but I don't remember them right now. Any questions? Well, I would say at 4th leaf, multiple times we picked over 11 tons to the acre. We've had a run of like 14 ton, 6 years in a row at 14 ton average right in there with, decent fruit size. I'm concerned about the leaf to fruit ratio. When we went into this system, because we're not pruning a lot, we get high early yields because we don't prune very much. And we push them hard, we put a lot of fertility to them, and it doesn't seem like it should work. But the fact that everything's vertical changes the dynamics, and it works for us. Most of them don't work as far as varieties. Varieties that don't set, and there are plenty of them, even some alleged self-fertile varieties. We've had trouble with Benton. Some years we have great crops, but they're not consistent. Kiona was supposed to be self-fertile. They're out. They're gone now. It's got to be I like self-fertile cherries if we can get good ones of those. Okay, the question is about spurs versus basal fruiting or horizontal wood fruiting. Early robin is a great system for this because it stays pretty spurry. It doesn't throw out a lot of branches, but it stinks because it doesn't set fruit. So different varieties are different, but when they start to throw out, and one of the rules with UFO is no side branches. Well, we cheat on that, and as they throw out laterals, we'll stub them back and hopefully keep a vegetative bud or two at the end of that lateral and pick those wood cherries at the base of that 1-year wood. And we can do that for a couple of years, but that's the sign it's time to get that limb out of there. And we just cut it out at the base. We used to try to cut them off where there was down low in the limb where there was something pushing or a growing point. We'd cut them above that. But we found out you get a lot of adventitious buds pushing out of that old trunk randomly, and it doesn't really matter if you leave a stub, so we cut them off pretty flush. You get really random renewals. Some of them are too strong, a lot of them are too weak. Once in a while, the Goldilocks just right happens. We're getting more and more aggressive with our renewal as we go. We keep, it's hard to cut a lot of good cherries out of a tree, but to keep that wood young and productive, we're trying to push harder and harder. We're taking out about 20% of the limbs each year, and the pruning is real easy. Most of it's done in the summertime, but we top them in the summertime once they've reached their limit, because we don't want to encourage a lot of brushy growth up in the top of the tree. We don't need it. And in the wintertime, a guy walks along with a chainsaw and just cuts off normally the fat limbs, sometimes the bald limbs, and it's a really simple system. So it's easy to train the workers. It is capital intensive. You got to put a trellis up. We spend quite a bit of money training, but we get early high yields of good fruit, and they've consistently stayed high. Rain can ruin anything, but other than that, we haven't had any weather problems.
Mike, could you comment on, Keith's making some questions about the renewal process. Could you comment on that, your experience with KGB as well, please? I think one of them is on, or both of them are on.
Is that? So Matt's question was, what about renewal in a KGB bush? And hopefully this won't offend anybody that's a UFO user, but KGB is a very similar thing where we're setting fruit on vertical wood. And I think that is a real challenge. I've been to Kim Green's orchard a few times. I've seen orchards in California where when they make a renewal cut on a leader, they get a nice, well-balanced limb growing again. It's not a bull sucker, and it's not just some little spaghetti noodle. It's a really nice limb that you can work with. We just don't seem to get that. It's maybe 1 in 3 or maybe 1 in 4 makes a really good renewal limb, and that's part of the challenge that we face and why we don't currently do a bush system. We converted everything, all those over to steep leader, is because we weren't getting consistent renewal branches. And so again, when that tree's young for the first while and all that wood is cranking out cherries, it's like, man, this is it. But when all those branches get old and they're that big around, it drops off fast, and then we can't keep it going consistently. And that seems to be universal for all the varieties we had it on too.
Well, it seems to me that it doesn't matter what system you're using. The renewal process is fundamental, right? You've got to get through that regardless. Norm, do you want to make a few comments about steep leader style and how you mentioned quite clearly we don't want this large wood. How do you keep rejuvenating wood in the steep leader architecture?
Is it on? Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about quality fruit, big cherries, that's where we're going to make money. But when you start getting large wood on those trees, you're just going to struggle getting the good sized leaf, the good sized cherry that you want. So you need to come back and analyze what your tree looks like, whether it's a steep leader or central leader. It really doesn't matter. Your quality fruit is going to be on the younger wood, where you're going to be developing really large leaves, and those cherries will develop into that 9, 9.5, 10-row cherry that's going to make you some money. So be aggressive. If you've got some 2020 Bings out there and they're still producing and you're making money at it, you can make more money if you get rid of some of those great big leaders out there and start putting good young wood in there. We all have our own plantings. We're all trying to make a living out there. You pick how you want and where you want to grow your fruit. Don't be afraid to use that chainsaw. Get out there, cut that bigger wood off, and be happy that it's on the ground, and then you just chip it up and it goes back into the soil and you got some good organic matter.
Yeah, questions?
Can you talk about rootstock preferences based on the different systems?
Rootstocks What rootstocks?
Rootstocks? The last planting that we did was on crimps, and then part of it was on Gisela. We like to use the younger, newer variety rootstocks rather than the Mazards. It was a great rootstock 30, 40 years ago, but today we have better rootstocks, and I think the precocity will help. It also helps when you're going with these tighter plantings. You do have some situations where you could get more root suckering showing up. You could have some problems with a limited amount of root, and you could get some problems with wind tipping some of those trees over if you don't watch your balance when you're pruning. You got anything?
We've used some crimps, and we've had terrible problems with suckering. Suckering is a problem on all rootstocks. It'd be nice if we could get some rootstocks that don't sucker, but crimps was really bad for us. We use Gisela 5, 6, 12. Most of ours is on 6. Seems to be a good balance of vigor and precocity.
We need precocious rootstocks because we can't sacrifice the yield. They bring more management, and they're harder. You know, they tip over especially if your irrigation system is just a hose it down type of engineering thing. But we need to have precocious rootstocks, and we have to have precocious varieties, and we need to figure out the pruning, nutrient management, irrigation management to have that work. That's my point of view. We have had a lot of success with Gisela. We've struggled with crimps, but we have a lot of it, and we'll work with it.
Yeah, the most cost-efficient way to deal with rodents and bird damage in each of your venues.
So I'll comment on that. For whatever reason, I don't know the science, but we got a lot of acres of them, and this is a phenomena. I think that gophers and voles seem to prefer crimps rootstock. I don't know why, but they do seem to prefer that rootstock, and many of our neighbors have had the same experience. And so it's critical, especially in crimps plantings, to be effective on managing your gophers and your voles. The least cost effective is to not do it, because you're going to have high tree loss, and that causes inconsistency in your block, and you can't have that. So we do it all and spend a lot of money on trapping. If you pay piece rate on trapping, that's probably the most efficient way to do it. You know, pay a bounty on gophers. There's probably some law in Washington that allows people not to do that, maybe Oregon too, but I don't know. Call it something else. But we also run verminator machines. They go almost all season long when the soil moisture is there, that we can make it work in the spring and in the fall. I have verminators going right now in the winter as long as we can get traction. And then we do some broadcast bait for vole control for spot control for voles.
We use bait a lot. We'll send folks through the course of the whole year. If we find mouse holes out there, we'll put it directly into the mouse hole. We try not to broadcast out where the wild turkeys and the other birds can get into the mouse poison. Bird control, I had the best bird control this year that I've ever had in my life, but we didn't pick any cherries. They would have starved if they'd have come in. That's all I can tell you about birds.
We haven't had vole problems in our cherries. We do in the apples sometimes, but we keep a clean herbicide strip and try not to give them much cover. We're also kind of on the edge of the irrigation district, and we have a lot of coyotes and hawks that help keep things down. We've chased birds a lot of different ways, and you know, there's always a new magic way coming out, but at the end of the day, when we look at what we spend chasing birds and the damage that we get, we don't have feedlots around. There's a bunch of dry, edge of the irrigation district, not a lot of habitat out there. We don't have as much bird pressure as a lot of guys, so I'm thankful for that. We tend not to spend any money chasing birds anymore.
All right, I think I'm just going to do one final call for a quick question, or anybody have a comment that would you like to make on the things that you heard this morning before we pack up? Yes, in the front row, please.
Have many of you heard about the
Question is, have any of you heard of or experienced with the pergola system? And if so, what is your opinion?
Can't help you.
That's an excellent last question. 3 no's from these guys. You got them to be quiet.
we are with our 100 years.
Yeah. Thanks for